Okay, so Hassan, do you want to first say a few things about yourself and then I'll introduce the topic?
Sure. Hassan Damluji. I lead a think tank called Global Nation, which works on international cooperation. How can we improve cooperation between countries to solve global challenges like climate change, but also pandemics, conflict, and inequality? And I'm a senior fellow at the London School of Economics and International Relations. And yeah, we can talk about the rest.
Okay, so now everyone in the room also understands why you're the perfect person to be involved in this discussion. So, but basically the topic of the short discussion is about climate cooperation in the region. So we are just on the border of Ukraine, right? They've gone through a war. They are still going through a war. At some point, hopefully it will stop and the reconstruction will begin. So basically, we have this massive opportunity, right, in terms of how things can be reconstructed. They can be influenced through policy. They can be influenced through money, through cash. But since we don't have Irina here, maybe we should think about it from the perspective of the European Union. You know, what and how should the European Union do in order to transform Ukraine into some kind of a role model for the region?
I want to actually say something more challenging than that with regards to the Ukraine war. Russia produces a huge amount of oil and gas. We know that. And they also have a lot of dirty industry. They are also burning a lot of this stuff, as well as producing it and selling it to others. And so one way of thinking about climate change, combating climate change, is say, well, the EU should stop buying Russian oil and gas, and then they will reduce their emissions. So did you solve climate change by doing that? Did you reduce the amount of Russian oil and gas that's being produced or sold to someone else? No. We haven't even touched it. Yeah. And this really explains why climate change is a global problem. Because you doing your bit on your own is actually worth zero. It's doing your bit and bringing others in. Otherwise, it's like, there's a hole in the bucket and you keep putting your water in, but, the water keeps flowing away. So in a country like Romania or in a region like Eastern Europe, how difficult is it to imagine cooperating with Russia over climate change? That's the scale of the challenge we have. Because actually, who cares if Ukraine is a model country, if the next door neighbor is producing 10 million barrels of oil a day? So yes, I think there are opportunities in Ukraine to make it a leader. And my understanding is that they are not reliant on hydrocarbons. They maybe they have coal that they exploit, but they also have the largest nuclear power station in Europe. And there's no reason why they can't become, even more clean in the energy they produce. And then other things, you mentioned construction, right? Construction is a huge source of greenhouse gases. But for me, the real thing that the conflicts in this region brings up is this idea that actually we would have to collaborate with the Russians if we really want to tackle this problem at a global level.
Okay, but I'd like to actually challenge you a little bit. And so if we earlier discussed about the fact that corporations and even SMEs, they look after the money. So they want to make more money. They have a very clear incentive. Now, we as humans, we do have the same incentive most of the times. Not everybody, but a lot of us. So if Ukraine can become a model of an economy that is profiting massively out of climate change and green transition, could this become a model for other countries to want to copy them? And maybe Russia can become one of them if, of course, management changes, perhaps. So do you see this happening? I mean, do we have another example in the world of a country that's done that and they're massively profiting, but not by selling LPG or whatever the US is selling because of the war, but like really doing a proper investment in.
So I think when you're talking about countries which are, recipients of help from international partners, right, which Ukraine is because of the extraordinary, difficulties it's gone through related to conflict, but also it's quite a poor country, certainly by European standards, then you could compare it to Rwanda from that point of view, which is even lower income, but is fortunate not to have been invaded recently, but they also rely on international partners to some degree, but they have done a lot on climate change and climate resilience. They have almost no fossil. Now, of course, it's easier if you have certain water resources that allow you to do hydroelectric and other things, but they have made incredible advances, especially for a low-income country. So I think there are examples of this. There are also examples of when it's very difficult, and South Africa is a good example of that. There's something in South Africa called the Just Transition Partnership. Just meaning, equitable, the kind of justice, but it's a transition. Now, those things are in tension because the idea of transition says stop burning oil and gas, but the idea of justice is that it's not punitive, we'll help you, and we'll do it in a way that is, sensitive to your needs. Now, again, Ukraine and South Africa is an upper middle income country, higher income actually per capita than Ukraine. So as another country that has help from international partners, it's roughly the same size as Ukraine in terms of population. It's an interesting one to think of. That hasn't gone as well. So that's one who said, okay, how do we make sure that Ukraine doesn't have the same problem? Well, what happened in South Africa? The problem in South Africa is that there's not enough power. Okay, so there's blackouts. They used to have a lot of industry. It's leaving the country because industry needs power, right? Reliable power. Okay, so you lose investment. It's a terrible problem for the economy and for the people. There's just not enough power. And so then you come in and you say we need to decarbonize. Well, the quickest way to get power online is through gas generation. Currently, they have coal generation. Gas is much less climate change causing than coal. And you can get it online now, significantly increase the amount of energy you have in this transitional phase, which from South Africa is bad management of the energy system, crisis of not enough power. In Ukraine, the transition is, war and bombing of the power plants. And through that, people can see that there's quick improvement in the situation, they buy into it. And over time, you can transition out of that gas. And straight away, you can add on top of that gas other forms, right? But that's not what they did. They said everything in this Just Transition Partnership has to be renewable. So we said, okay, well, solar, but then gas can be turned on at night. Solar goes off at night, right? You don't have the battery infrastructure in place, or you don't have the hydrogen. So the Just Transition Partnership quickly lost friends in South Africa because they could see that the quick solutions to solve the emergency were not being used. And then everything is for the long term. If you want people to go with you in the long term, they need to see quick wins as well. So I think in Ukraine, the EU, as you mentioned, and other financing partners with a very strong green credentials, they need to make sure they don't make the long term and the best the enemy of the good and the short term and the support they needed of the public. So I think that's an important lesson. There may need to be some gas power in a city that's had the power stations bombed. They just don't have power at all, and they need quickly to get up and running. While we're installing solutions that are a bit more complex because of the grid, like solar and these other ones, where actually, it's challenging to make it work.
So basically, we're kind of circling back into the buy-in problem, right? Like the fact that for the population to buy into a solution and to a vision,
of course,
they need to very clearly understand the benefits, but also not to suffer, right?
If you're Ukrainian and you've lost your house and there's no power, and someone from the EU comes and says, no, well, you can't have power now because it's very important that it's renewable, and they're not going to buy into that.
Yeah.
The human need for energy is so great. That's what got us into this problem. So we have to recognize that need, as well as finding ways to make it renewable.
But a lot of people in the EU are going through similar things because it's not about the fact that they don't have energy, but it's about the fact that it suddenly became super expensive. And then renewable became a very easy target for alternative politicians, let's say, to blame. And to say, this is why it's expensive. It's not about the opening of the EU-wide energy market. It's not about mismanagement. It's not about intermediaries buying and selling electricity and so on. It's all green energy, right? So the fact that there was no preemptive communication in this regard, and showing that, okay, it might be slightly more expensive, but it will be by this much, and we will, subsidize it during the transition. So the problem is that it's not just about doing the right thing, but communicating it, right? And showing some kind of. This is why I was naively enough to ask the question if Ukraine can become a model that others could look at and say, oh, okay, we want that.
The problem is, when it comes to communication, that the fossil fuel industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and they are funding the other argument. And they have a very strong financial incentive to throw a lot of money at funding the other argument. And then we, who are not in the fossil fuel industry and are trying to make the correct argument, we have incentives, but we have a lot of pulls on our cash. So, if you think about the government of a country like Romania, okay, it may want its people to come along, but it can't justify putting $1 billion in a communication campaign around fossil fuels. Whereas they can put $1 billion because they'll make $2 billion in the extra profits of delaying the transition, right? So the business case for making the alternative argument is very strong, and this is the problem. There are people out there making this nuanced case that you just made. You're one of those people, but they don't get the platform necessarily. And then you have, at the same time, a group of the public who is instinctively not trusting of institutions, right? So that's the dry tinder that just needs the small spark. In fact, it's a large spark of the huge money of the fossil fuel industry, but all it takes is a small spark to say, don't trust this, don't trust the government. They're actually stealing your money for some globalist conspiracy around climate change. So we have to acknowledge that, and in doing so, be a little bit generous with those people who are working hard to get the communications right. They are also in a war, a communications war.
Is there anyone that wants to ask a question?
Let me say one more thing about Ukraine being a model. The thing about Ukraine is it's a relatively high-skilled, low-wage workforce. China, with its high-skilled, relatively low-wage workforce, has created a solar industry, which is great for the world in that it reduces prices, but it's hugely problematic because we're going to go from dependence on Russian hydrocarbons to dependence on Chinese solar. So can Ukraine's manufacturing industry be resurrected as the site of production of low-cost but high-skilled solar, and decent jobs, but also taking advantage of the fact that they have a lower cost of living and you could be competitive? Because for Europe, competitiveness is the challenge in these industries. So that could be an interesting one, where it's actually a manufacturing piece and not just about their emissions.
Yeah, that's true. This is I just wanted to check. So I have a question, which, you kind of made me think about it when you talked about the billions that the coal industry and the fossil fuel industry puts into communication. Is the solution internalizing the cost of emissions? Is that the only solution, that we can make them responsible by having them pay for the emissions, and then maybe they change their minds about how they produce energy?
Yeah, clearly you need government intervention. And people who are very market-oriented will say, you let the markets for fossil fuels play out, but you price in the cost. Other people will say you ban new fossil fuel exploration and so on, and you use other types of mechanisms to force down the curve. We have a colleague here speaking, Michel, who I think he's on stage right now in the other room. His whole business is around the pricing externalities. How can we actually effectively price for the negative consequences, which are costs, but they're not your costs as the producer, because you don't have to pay those costs, but actually somewhere those costs are there. Yeah. Whether it's the cost of sucking carbon out of the air, or in other industries, it would be other negative externalities. So can we really cost, what is the food on your plate really costing the planet, right? It's definitely an interesting approach. What I worry about is that economics alone, it's a form of economics, right? It's essentially a tax. What I worry about is that economics alone is not enough to keep global warming within the limits that we want. And the reason for that, as I said in my speech earlier today, is that we don't have any successful history on planet Earth of transitioning from one fuel to another. Ever, except one. So, okay, that's interesting. The economics has changed a lot of different fuels, but we've never transitioned. What do I mean by that? We used to use muscle power. And then we started using energy beyond muscle power. How? Through burning wood. Did we transition away from wood?
I mean,
we burn more wood now than we've ever burned in human history. We burn more wood now than before the Industrial Evolution. Okay, then we had coal. Did we transition away from coal when the economics changed? No. We burn more coal now and more wood than we ever have done in history. So then we had oil and gas. Do we now... But, right? So you can see where I'm going with this. Now, solar is in many cases the cheapest energy there is already, okay? And we're burning more oil and gas and coal and wood than ever before. And this year, the year that solar broke through in its pricing, our climate emissions went up, not down. So where is the evidence that putting a tax will end it quickly? It might change the curve, okay? But it's unlikely to change the fundamentals. And especially when you think about this as a global problem. So you put a tax. Whereas I'm Saudi Arabia, I extract oil for $5, $3, $2 a barrel. Now, I'd like to sell it for $100. Okay, but it's going to cost me $3. So until your energy is cheaper than $3 a barrel, that's how much it costs me to get mine for free, right? So these are the kind of economics. The economics I don't think work. I think you need multilateral global action. So what's the one fuel that we transitioned away from? Whale oil.
Okay.
In the 19th century, gas lamps, oil lamps, were powered by killing whales in the ocean and taking their fat and burning it. That's the only source of power that we've ever transitioned to. We now don't do that anymore. How did we do it? We did it by an international treaty on ending whaling. Okay? That is the only time we've ever done it. We didn't do it through economics. So that is unfortunately what we're going to have to do for carbon emissions as well.
Unless we are able to make it cheaper. Because I'm thinking now of these windmills, right? Like proper windmills, the first ones that were creating flour. So we moved away from it because it was easier to do it in another way or cheaper. But I think you're completely right. So
But you'll never make it cheaper. Here's why. Right now, oil is not $60.
Yeah,
we think it's $60 because that's the price it costs, but it's $3, right?
Maybe in 1,000 years when it runs out. We'll see. So a lot of people behind you are showing me that the time is way off and we have to go to the other room. So it was really great to speak to you. I'm sorry that you weren't able to speak with Irina, but thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.